Module 3. Research participants. Imagine you get an email from the school asking if you want to earn $100 for playing a game once a day for 5 days. You click the link and find out that the psychology department needs several students to take part in a study about the use of a new app where you practice chair yoga or race a car and measure your pulse and blood pressure. This is a common request for a human participant, which is a critical role in psychology research. These are individuals who voluntarily take part in research studies designed to investigate different aspects of human behavior, cognition, emotions, and mental processes. Human participants can offer important data on different topics, theories, or hypotheses. This gives the researcher the advantage of working directly with someone who can tell them what their reactions and preferences are. There are several types of research studies that involve the use of human participants that include observational studies, surveys and questionnaires, clinical trials, longitudinal studies, and experimental studies. The researcher will base their selection of participants on specific criteria, such as age, gender, health status, or the presence of certain conditions. Researchers often recruit participants through various methods, including advertisements, community outreach, or collaborations with institutions or organizations. Researchers will adhere to ethical guidelines to ensure the well-being of the participants, but there are a few issues that can arise with participants called participant reactivity. Participant reactivity is a phenomenon in which the response to the behaviors of research participants is affected by their awareness that they are part of the research study. This is considered a potential threat to the research validity since they can change their natural behaviors, attitudes or responses which may not accurately represent typical behaviors or thoughts in real-life situations. Participant reactivity can be seen in several ways. The participants may try to figure out the purpose or hypothesis of the study and alter their behavior to match their perception of what the researcher expects. There is the Hawthorne effect, which is where the participants change their behaviors simply because they know they are being observed. For example, a classroom full of children will be on their best behavior when they know they are being watched. Participants may have evaluation apprehension and feel self-conscious or anxious about being evaluated. This can make them try to present themselves in a positive light and not disclose true information to the researcher. Participant reactivity not only lies with the participants, but the researcher or members of the research study can impact the participants' behaviors. They might unintentionally convey their expectations or biases through verbal or nonverbal cues. Researchers need to understand the impacts of the participants' effect on the research outcomes. The participants' perceptions should be consistent for the study, and if consistency is not maintained, this could result in alternative explanations for the results. Researchers can utilize various strategies to help minimize participant reactivity and mitigate its impact on the research findings. 2 ways to reduce this can be through single-blind or double-blind procedures. In single-blind studies, participants are unaware of the experimental conditions, while in double-blind studies, both participants and experimenters are unaware of the conditions. The use of deception can also help the participants from guessing the true purpose of the research study. Deception can be useful, but needs to be used sparingly in research designs. A great way to avoid participants from changing their behaviors is through naturalistic observation. The participants are not aware they are being observed, and the researcher can obtain more authentic behaviors. By observing participants in their natural environment without their knowledge, researchers can minimize reactivity and obtain more authentic behavior. The use of several methods to collect the information can also help. The participants can use a combination of self-reporting measures, observations, and assessments. One of the last ways to decrease participant reactivity would be debriefing. This is after the study is completed. The researcher provides the participants with a thorough explanation of the study's purpose, if deception was used, and any concerns or questions they may have. The participants will know that after the study is completed, they will be debriefed. This can help them not worry about any change in their behaviors to try and figure out what the study is about. Understanding some of the reasoning why a participant might be impacted is a goal for the researcher. The researchers should consider the characteristics of the participant involved in their studies. These would include their age, gender, cultural background, educational level, and socioeconomic status. All of these can influence how the individual thinks and behaves in response to the research design. There is also the possibility that their participants come in with pre-existing beliefs, attitudes, and experiences that can also influence their responses. Researchers need to be able to use valid measures to overcome any of these potential biases. This could include assessments and how a participant might have an influence. Researchers must also understand their methods for recruiting participants into studies. The researcher needs to understand the target population for their studies and be able to access those specific groups, and if there are any limitations in those specific groups that will interfere with generalizing the results to a larger population. The participants' compliance and motivation with the research design instructions is also an important component that can influence the outcomes of this study. This can be as simple as having a short study in which motivational issue do not factor into wanting to complete the study. The researcher can address some of these issues by asking for the participants' feedback and reflections during the study. This can help the researcher provide better understanding of how the participants reacted, which can be used in future research designs. This can be done through feedback, debriefing, interviews, and follow-up surveys. Researchers begin by selecting a pool of participants for their study. The participant pool is a group of potential research participants that are typically recruited through various methods or randomly assigned from a specific population. Random assignment is a procedure used in research studies to create multiple research groups that include participants with similar characteristics. The research participants are randomly assigned to the different groups within that study. The purpose of random assignment is to create groups that are comparable and ensure that any differences observed between the groups are due to independent variables being studied rather than pre-existing participant characteristics. Assigning the participants is entirely unbiased. This helps to ensure that each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to a particular group. Depending on the research study, will tell how many different groups there will be. In simple research designs, there may be one independent variable, which is what is manipulated, and then a control group. The experimental group receives the variable, like a mediation group, while the control group does not receive the treatment and serves as a baseline for the study. Random assignment of the participants to the various groups in an experiment helps maximize the possibility that extraneous variables will not have an effect on the various treatment groups. Random assignment is widely used in psychology to ensure rigorous experimental designs and enhance the credibility of the research findings. Even with randomization, there can be groups that are not perfectly matched on all variables. This would be a confounding variable. One method to address confounding variables is the use of individual matching. By ensuring similarity between study and control participants, researchers can attribute any differences observed in the study outcomes to the independent variable of interest with more confidence. Individual matching is a method of controlling confusion in a study when setting up groups to compare. The purpose of individual matching is to create groups that are comparable on specific variables of interest, thereby reducing the potential influence of those variables on the study outcomes. The researcher can recruit participants who meet the inclusion criteria for the study. The researcher could also identify specific variables that need to be controlled within the study. The researcher can then look at the pool of participants, the inclusion criteria that certain participants have met, and the variables that need to be controlled within the study, and then begin a matching procedure. The participants are then formed into groups so that they are representative of the specific criteria. Within this group, they will be broken down into a control group and then a group or groups who will receive the treatment. When the researcher collects the data from the group, they will compare the outcomes or responses between the study participants and their matched control participants, analyzing the effects of the independent variable while controlling for the variables that were matched. There are advantages and disadvantages to individual matching. One of the advantages of individual matching is that there can be situations where random assignment is just not feasible. By creating comparable groups, researchers can strengthen the internal validity and improve their findings by being able to control the participants' characteristics related to the research study's area of focus. This is particularly beneficial when the matched variables are potential confounders that could influence the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. Confounding variables are extraneous factors that are associated with both the independent variable and the dependent variable, creating a fake relationship. By controlling these variables through individual matching, researchers can isolate the effects of the independent variable and minimize the influence of confounding, thus enhancing the internal validity of the study. Which variables do you want to control can be the disadvantage of matching. The researcher needs to be careful to consider which variables are relevant, since choosing the wrong variable will not control confounding and can lead to low validity. The research also needs to be careful of how many variables are controlled. The larger the number, the more difficult it becomes to find participants. The results can also be impacted when there are so many variables that the results cannot be applied to other individuals or settings. Just like with the use of deception in research, the researcher needs to weigh the benefits of individual matching against its limitations. One aspect to help researchers is the use of institutional review boards. IRBs are federally mandated, locally administered groups charged with evaluating risks and benefits of human participants' research at their institution. The primary concern of the Institutional Review Board is to protect the welfare, rights, and interests of human participants. The IRB can provide an evaluation of the research protocols, ethical oversight, participant protection, informed consent process, compliance with regulations and ongoing monitoring. The IRB can evaluate and review the research protocols to make sure that they adhere to ethical standards and regulations. The IRB also assesses the risks and the benefits associated with the research study, if it has adequate informed consent procedures, the qualifications of the researchers and the protection of participants. With ethical oversight, they can review the entire process from the beginning of the design stage to the final publication of the results. The IRB's primary concern will be that of the protection and the welfare and rights of the human participants. Part of their process is to assess any potential risks and benefits, weighing the potential value of the research results against any potential harm. The IRB will review and approve the informed consent procedure used in the research study. This will provide enough information to the participants about the procedure, purpose, potential risks and benefits, and their rights as participants. It will emphasize the importance of their participation and the participants' right to withdraw from the study at any time without penalty. The IRB operates in accordance with federal regulations which provide ethical guidelines for research involving human participants. This also provides the researchers with regulations and any additional local or institutional requirements for conducting research. The IRB can ask for ongoing monitoring of the progress of the research study by getting regular updates, reports, and/or amendments that have been added to the study. The IRB also has the authority to suspend or terminate a study if there are concerns about participants' welfare or ethical violations. The purpose of the research design refers to the overall strategy that is chosen to integrate the different aspects of a study into a logical and coherent method, ensuring it will effectively address the research problem. Some of the factors that you should consider when designing a research study are the number of groups, the use of a control group, and the use of a pretest. When the researcher is thinking about creating the research design, they want to control unwanted variation, create an outline or a plan for the data collection, and suggest how the data will be collected. The control group is used in an experiment to ensure that your experiment works. It's a way to make sure that the treatment the research is giving is causing the experimental results and not something outside the experiment. The control group is a group separated from the rest of the experiment, where the independent variable is being tested. A good experiment includes a control group because it gives information on how participants would perform without experiencing the experimental treatment. The use of a pretest in research design can serve several purposes and contribute to the overall quality of the study. A pretest can establish a baseline measurement of the variables before any intervention or treatment is applied. This will serve as a reference point for comparison with post-intervention measurements and allows for an evaluation of any changes or effects resulting from the intervention. Pretests can also help in the randomization and equivalence for the study, when all participants are given the pretest and then randomly assigned to different groups. Some of the participants will go to a control group, while other participants will go into the intervention groups. This increases the confidence that the differences observed in post-intervention are due to the intervention itself rather than pre-existing group differences. Pretests do not always need to be used and are not appropriate for all studies. The researcher needs to decide on the nature of the intervention, the available resources, and the potential benefits and drawbacks of including a pretest for their design. A factor that a researcher needs to consider is something called a confounding variable. Confounding variables are factors that are related to both the independent variable, which is what is being studied or manipulated, and the dependent variable, which is the variable being measured or observed. A confounding variable may distort or mask the effects of another variable on the research question. Research designs. Confounding variables can threaten the internal validity of the study by introducing alternative explanations for the observed results. For example, if the research design is investigating the relationship between meditation practice and cardiovascular health, they would recruit participants and randomly assign them to either the meditation group or to a control group. The meditation group engages in meditation practices while the control group does not. However, if the researcher fails to control age, which is a potential confounding variable, the results of the study may be compromised. Older participants are more likely to have poor cardiovascular health, regardless of their meditation practices. If the mediation group happens to have a higher proportion of younger participants compared to the control group, any observed differences in cardiovascular health may be falsely attributed to meditation when in fact it is due to age. Internal validity and external validity are two important concepts in research methodology that assess the quality and generalizability of research findings. Internal validity refers to the extent to which a study accurately establishes a causal relationship between variables. It addresses whether the observed effects can be attributed to the manipulated independent variable rather than other factors. Threats to internal validity include confounding variables, selection bias, history effects, maturation of participants, instrumentation issues, and experimental mortality. In order to control the threats to internal validity, a researcher can provide random assignment, use of control groups, counterbalancing in double-blind or single-blind studies. When looking at the internal validity threat known as history, the use of an interrupted time sequence design is used. This design is used to evaluate the impact of an intervention by observing the outcome variables before and after the intervention is implemented. It allows researchers to examine whether there is a causal relationship between the intervention and the observed changes in the outcome variable over time. The data from this type of research design is collected at multiple points both before and after the intervention. This means introducing and withdrawing the hypothesis or some part of it and then seeing if anything changes in the outcome the researcher assesses. An example of the interrupt time series design would be when a researcher is interested in reducing bullying behavior in schools. The school might implement an anti-bullying intervention program and use this design to assess the impact. The researcher would collect data on bullying incidences or self-reported bullying behavior over a period of time before and after the intervention. The researcher would then analyze the trends in bullying incidences pre- and post-intervention and evaluate the effectiveness of the interventions in reducing bullying behavior. The regression discontinuity study can also be impacted by threats to internal validity. This design is used to estimate the causal effect of an intervention or treatment by exploiting a cutoff point or threshold in a continuous independent variable. Participants are assigned to treatment or control groups based on their scores on a continuous independent variable. A regression discontinuity study is close to an experiment under ideal conditions. It reduces selection bias, which gives it high internal validity, and in presenting challenges to broader generalization, which gives it low external validity. For example, researchers interested in evaluating the effectiveness of a counseling intervention for individuals with depression could use a clinical severity score as the cutoff. Those with severity scores above the cutoff would receive the intervention, while those below would not. The regression discontinuity design would allow for estimating the effect of the counseling intervention on reducing depressive symptoms. One threat to internal validity for regression discontinuity design is called differential history. This refers to a potential threat in which the experimental and control groups experience different historical events or circumstances that could independently affect the outcome variable. This threat arises when the groups being compared are exposed to different external factors or events during the study, other than the intervention or treatment being investigated. Differential history can confound the interpretation of study results because it becomes difficult to attribute changes in the outcome variable solely to the intervention or treatment. Instead, changes may be influenced by the unique historical events or circumstances experienced by one group but not the other. External validity is the validity of applying the conclusions of a scientific study outside the context of that study. It is the extent to which the results of a study can be generalized to and across other situations, people, stimuli, and times. External validity is crucial for understanding the broader applicability and relevance of research findings. There is often a balance between internal and external validity. Research designs that prioritize internal validity may involve tightly controlled conditions, thus limiting their general ability to real-world situations. Researchers can enhance external validity by using diverse representative populations in real-world settings. However, they can sacrifice controls over confounding factors and potentially compromising internal validity. Threats to external validity could include sample characteristics such as age, gender, social economic status. Researchers want to strive for a balance between internal and external validity based on the specific goals of their research. Internal validity gives the causal claim within the study, while external validity ensures the generalizability of findings to a broader population or real-world context.